So we have some questions that came in, and I'm going to read them, and I try to answer them as good as I can. So Edward Morales is asking, I love Daniel's approach to depth and dynamics. One of the few mixers that I can say that can make music project outside the speaker really well. Okay, so thank you. My question for Daniel is, he has a course already prepared to launch. I think we anyway have covered that. So the course is available on my homepage. I think it's also basically you can just click it in the video, but otherwise homepage is DanielDettwiler.com, and the course is actually ready. It took longer than I thought it would take, but we did it for the first time, and obviously a course, it takes a lot of time to edit it, to record it in a good quality, but it is out. Okay, let's go on. The Monk Beat says, I have a personal idea about software emulation of hardware audio gear. I feel that technology is having great results for compressors, equalizers, and even distortion units. On the other hand, I feel that emulations of ambient reverb delay units is still very far from having the same results. I think that cheap hardware reverb units are more effective than many plugins. And then he brings some example. And then, do you think it's possible to obtain a good commercial mix having just a stereo track? Yeah, okay, that's another question. Let's do this later. So the question now is, he thinks that in the computer, equalizers and compressors, emulations of hardware is better and or closer to the original, and reverb units not. I don't feel that way, I have to say. Actually, an emulation is never, ever the real thing. It is just not possible. It's just what it is, an emulation. And emulations of something in the computer are great because if you don't have the hardware, and even we here, we just don't have the hardware of everything, and it would not be possible today to just buy everything you would want. Hardware is always expensive. And I use emulations in the computer all the time. If I have a tom-tom that needs some compression, I usually use just the plug-in version of the 1160 76, just because I don't have enough here. I use an analog one on the bass drum under the snare. Also, I use an analog on the overhead. I use it on the vocals, but then my analog versions are just, I just don't have any more. So I'm very happy with the plugins, but I'm not expecting that it sounds like the original. I actually think reverbs are closer. So if I compare the Relab 480 to the real 480, it's not totally close, but it's kind of close. And if I compare the compressors, if you really hit them hard, they don't sound the same. And I just yesterday discussed this with a physics guy from the Paul Scherrer Institute in Switzerland. Just so you have an idea, they constructed the atomic reactor, I think 40, 50 years ago. And so this is really a huge physical research company, the largest one we have in Switzerland. And we came to the conclusion that real saturation in analog gear is just no way to emulate what happens in the gear. And if you mix analog, and if this is what you like, also you push up the faders here and you get into the saturation. So if this is the secret how you build a great mix, then that thing just doesn't exist in the computer, but other things exist in the computer. So I think all the emulations are okay. They are as good as what we can do today. Also, usually engineers don't want to pay that much for the emulation. So actually companies can also not really do great emulations. So that might be another problem. I'm absolutely sure we could do better emulations, but then the plugins would be more expensive and then nobody would buy it. So let's come to the second question of him. Do you think it's possible to obtain a good commercial mix having just the stereo track with the music parts like drum, bass, melodic things all mixed together and the vocal track separately? I mean, a very typical situation nowadays. Many singer, rappers, and so on mixed the thing by itself. They just want to add the vocals on top, mix and master it. In a few words, can you balance anything in the beat track unless you try something with those RX plugins? You can just mix the vocal as reverbs parallel and so on. No, I think that's actually a problem. And it usually only happens with some techno and dance and hip hop tracks that indeed the artist is asking me to mix the stuff. And then I ask him, okay, how many tracks do you have? So I can make an offer. And the artist said, no, just 3 tracks. I have the vocal and I have the music part on 2 tracks mixed together. And can you do a mix? No, of course not. This is then like a stem mastering. Once music is mixed together, there is no way to remix it. And we don't want to use the RX rebalance tool in music. I know there is a great tutorial by Michael Brauer where he just did it with a very old mix that he wanted to remix, and then he demonstrated that tool. Yes, sometimes maybe it can help. You could basically duplicate the mixed or the beat track 3 times, and then with isotope, just on one track you make the drum a little bit louder and you make the other things softer. But I think that's not the way to go. To me, if somebody brings a mixed track and the vocal track, then basically it's like a stem mastering. And if the music track is mixed great already, then all is good. But if it's not mixed great, if there is the piano too soft, there is not really a way to make the piano louder. If the piano needs some great compression, but the drum is already compressed, you cannot deal anymore with that. So I think a good thing would be if the music producers would do more stem for the music. Just at least give me 1 stereo stem with the drum, 1 stereo track with the guitars, if there is any, 1 with the keys, 1 with the bass, and then the vocal, and then we could do more. But in general, mix it, we have the signal on the fader, or you have the signals in Pro Tools, and then everything is good. Okay. Sammy Pro asks, what is his approach, my approach, to mix drum and bass in order to retain punch and clarity for the respective elements? Well, that's difficult because it totally depends on how it's recorded. Sometimes you get great recorded drums from nice studio, and then actually just you open the fader and everything is good, and you have great room microphones. If you have great room microphones, then clarity is always there. Because if you don't have great room microphones, very often drum is recorded in a shabby small isolation booth or in a band room. You don't have room microphone. What do you do to create room? Well, you give reverb to the microphones you have. And if you have a snare microphone, you give reverb. It always makes a little bit the snare also unclear. And you have to give maybe too much reverb. Sometimes as a mixer, you have to give too much reverb just because room microphones were missing. And then if you don't want to give too much reverb, your mix would sound small. That is also not good. So whoever records in small rooms must accept that you have to mix then with reverb, with a good deal of reverb. The reverb always takes away a little bit the clarity, except if you make great reverb design. But even then, if the same drum would come with a great microphone for the room, and the drum was recorded in a great room, it means that you don't have to add reverb to the snare, or maybe just a little bit, because once you open the room mic, all reverb is there. And then you could even put more reverb on that track of the room microphones. But your close microphone can be what they are, like close mics. They are there for the clarity and to add a little bit punch. So, if I get great recorded tracks, then, anyway, if you get the best tracks on the world, nothing is a problem. And engineers like Al Schmidt, they always had great tracks. That's why their mixes always sounded great. And normal engineer, such as we often also have not so good tracks, and then we just need to create something. Let's assume we get the drum from a band room or from an isolation booth. Yeah, having reverbs with large prelays, this is important. And the second thing, what is really important, the smaller the rooms are that music is recorded in, the more shabby and bad sounding resonances you also have. It's like if you're singing in a shower, then some tones are sticking out just because of the resonance between the walls. Now, if we record a drum in a room that is maybe 2 meters wide and I don't know, 3 meters long. Well, that's not that big. And in this size, there are still waves that can build up with resonances, and that is not sounding good. And usually musicians and engineers don't hear those resonances very good in the mix, so they cannot really correct it very good. But this is the secret. All those resonances that the room is building must be filtered out. And there is a free tutorial in YouTube where I show how this is working, or in my masterclass, I also speak great deal of, I speak about this. The smaller the room, the more resonances you have between 200 and 700 hertz. And those resonances are not nice. And those resonances is a reason why many things today are unclear. And if you really manage to get a great equalization curve where these resonances of the room gets corrected, then you have a lot more clarity. And this is because nowadays we get recordings in small room. While 1955, if you listen great recordings by Nat King Cole, by like kind of Blue by Miles Davis, well, that was a huge room, 300 square meters. That means you don't have any shabby resonances between 200 and 500 hertz, because the room is so big that all resonances that this room still might have are maybe 20 hertz. That is so low that it's never ever disturbing the music anymore. Yeah, let's go on. What else do we have? By the same guy, what does he think about all in-the-box mixing compared to all analog or hybrid mixing? Well, that depends heavily, as I said before, what you want to do. And as a mixer, you just have to find ways with the system you mix. You could mix analog, but have not such a great desk, and then maybe the saturation is not that good, so you just cannot mix so hot, and you just find a way. I actually mixed some great tracks with the studio desks, and the studio desk didn't have that nice saturation of the K-deck. With the studio desk, if you went too high, it didn't sound good, so you have to go back a little bit. While with the K-deck, I can go in this upper maximum, and it still can handle the sound, so I have this advantage now. With the studio, I just had to do it differently. I mixed digital for about 15 years, and I made great mixes with digital in a box. Or if I say digital, it's nowadays in the box. To me, there is no difference whether you mix on a digital large format board such as a Sony Oxford or in the box. I mean, that's just the same. And it sounds a little bit different because mix buses might be implemented different, but in general, digital mixing is digital mixing. So, well, in the box, what do we have? We have extremely a good precision. So you open up the session a week later, and it still sounds absolutely the same. You can use this precision to your advantage because you can make reverb designs or little effects, and really you can go into great detail, and it always sounds the same. In analog, those great details don't really exist. If I mix something, I come back the next morning and I just want to quickly listen to the mix again, make some adjustments. Yeah, great. But I mean, many things in the mix are not there anymore just because the analog gear is not sounding the same. It even sounds different in the morning than in the evening. And these differences are not small. So if you are mixing analog, it's just very important to build up a robust mix. And then, and then you just have to accept it's not going to sound the same thing, same again once you are recording your mix. That's just in the nature of analog. And digital, you have way more precision. And you can work extremely well with the automation. So usually if I work just digital, what I do is really precise EQ automation. I automate the compressors. And this is all good. You can automate everything. You cannot do this on the analog console. But it also takes time because actually in a digital mix, you also have to automate everything. Otherwise, it just sounds boring. So actually the life that is created in the analog, just by nature of the analog, because there is noise, there is chaos, it's not always the same. So it sounds lively, rather fast. In the computer, I program this live with automations. So, yeah, in general, I think if you mix in the box, what is missing is this nice analog saturation. You just don't have it, but therefore you have precision. I personally think that the sonic quality of a production well, I can really compare it here because I have some production that I still mix only digital because there is just no budget. And usually if I bring it out to the console and to the hardware, it sounds a good deal better sonically. That's to me is for sure. And this is also the reason why I, as a mix engineer, still keep up with analog mixing desks. I know a lot of my colleagues now go digital only. And yeah, of course, it can be done. As I said, I have mixed 15 years digital only. I started digital only because when I was young, I didn't really see the advantage of analog audio. And so I just started digital. And those mixes are absolutely good. And I don't have a problem to listen to them. But if now I really can do the comparison, it's a little bit better sonically with analog. But also only if you really have expensive analog gear, like this mixing desk, like the Fairman equalizer, like the Unfairchild on the master bus. This all is just making the euphonics, or euphony in German, or just the great sound. It's always making it a little bit better. And those steps are not there in the computer. And I try to still, as long as I can, keep up with it financially, because obviously it's expensive to keep it running. The service is expensive. But I like to give it to the music. But I understand all colleagues that are saying it's too complicated and, the recalls are complicated. I actually don't offer recalls. I just tell my clients, if you want to mix with me analog, there are no recalls. We are just mixing it. We are making decisions. And I might ask you during the mix, are you happy with that vocal level? Or do you want me to make it a little bit louder, a little bit softer? All good for me, but just let's decide it at the moment where we mix the vocal. And I'm not going to change this anymore. And whoever doesn't accept this, well, I'm happy to mix digital then. Let's mix digital. And then my assistant can make all the recalls that the client wishes in minutes. Because in analog, it takes hours. Because it's one thing if you want to make a recall and you make the vocal 1 dB louder. But I mean, as you have everything again on the analog desk, as I said before, it doesn't sound the same. Maybe the drum is now a little bit softer. Maybe the compressor for the bass is giving a little bit more saturation for whatever reason. So it's anyway sounding different. Yeah, so no recalls if I mix analog. That's totally important. We do it as it was done in the 50s. No recalls. And this leads to far better mixes because you're concentrated. If you know you have to make recalls, you're not concentrated. Good, let's go on. We have to hurry. There's so many questions. Yeah, we have this thing here. If he was to mix a song all in the box, but only allowed one outboard gear, which outboard gear will he choose and why? Difficult. Might be either the Unfairchild compressor, because this one gives a mix, a lot of character in the upper mids, a lot of punch, and it really does a lot. Or it might be on a jazz or classical recording, the Fairman equalizer, because this makes the sonics just a little bit nicer, it makes everything bigger, it makes the high frequency part nicer. I would say it's one of those gear. Unfairchild by Undertone Audio, great compressor, or the Fairman equalizer. That will it be. One last thing to this entire analog mixing, you need great converters to really get the full benefit. If you go out to a console with shabby or with average converters, you have just mistakes on every channel that you go out. And then you have to go back into the computer, you again have mistakes. Usually, I think the goal is to have great converters, and then the mistake by the converter is smaller. And so then the advantage of the analog is really there. Otherwise, you have an advantage by the analog, but also a disadvantage by having other DA and AD converters. This is never for free. So AD converters and DA converters are important. Now, question by Virus Indigo. Can waves low air be used on kick or vocal? Well, I don't like this at all, but obviously, different engineer, different tastes. To me, it just adds some... Yeah, it adds some really low air. I mean, it's called low air, but I don't like to have that effect on my instruments, because I think it takes away the clarity. Usually, I like if those bass information is recorded well, and I don't like it I really just don't like it. Yeah, but that's just me. Another engineer might like it and use it. You always have to find a way with those plugins. Is it useful for you or is it not? For me, that's not useful. Glue compressors beside SSL, what other compressors can be used for drums? Should I saturate the groove before applying glue compression? As I said, I like analog the undertone on Fairchild to give glue. And I think this glue thing happens more with analog compressors. I have not really heard that in the box. But in the box, I might just use an emulation of the Fairchild compressor, or the Pi compressor by Waves also is good for glue, actually. That's a plugin which I like. And distortion before or after, it actually depends what you want. It's just a little bit different. Sometimes I do it after. Then basically the compressed signal gets distorted and gets, again, more harmonics. This can open up the compressed signal again. Or you can do it before, just give all the harmonics with the saturator and then compress this. Usually if you do it before, you could add a little bit more, and then the compressor might handle it a little bit, but basically just listen what sounds better. With plugins, you can just shift it around, have the saturator after it, have it before. Sometimes one sounds better, sometimes the other. Now we come to some questions by Chris Correll, which are really interesting questions. Where do you find ideas for composing jingles? Maybe we do this really short because this video is not about my composing work. I did compose jingles for the Swiss radio. And on those, I just went into a really huge room, 500 square meters with a grand piano. I just stayed there for about 12 hours on the grand piano, and I just improvised and I let the ideas come in. And maybe this is important because also if I'm doing a mix that turns out to be good, I'm usually also in a inspired process. I try to do it with intuition. What does this music really need? And I don't mix in a very logic way. I just really mix by just feel how is what I hear and what could I do so that the emotion gets better. And obviously to do this, you just before have to learn all the rules. And then later you can forget again about the rules because you just know that what you were doing, although it doesn't make sense in a theoretical way, but you just know it feels right and it works. But it takes some time until you can mix like this, but that's usually an important thing. Okay, second question. I need my glasses, otherwise I don't see anything. As someone who has recorded on large formats, how does that knowledge influence decisions on projects that are more simple by design? Yeah, a good question. If you mix like film music, scoring work, you just get thousands of tracks, and as an engineer, it just takes as many tracks as I'm given with, because I mean, why should I say, well, why does it have 1,000 tracks? It would also sound good with 100 tracks. That's not my job to decide this. If the client needs 1,000 tracks for something, he needs 1,000 tracks. And to mix a lot of tracks, you need to be organized. And the more of those large format production that you get, the more you just get organized and you get fast in mixing this. Now for very small projects, actually this organization skill still is helping me a lot. I have a very organized Pro Tools system. I use SoundFlow with a lot of macros, and I'm just fast in everything that I do. And if I have small projects, I just use the same organization tools. So I'm extremely fast, and to mix them, I stay organized. I can have all songs of an entire project in one session. This is great because then if at the next day or before I end a project and maybe I want to just make some quick changes, I can always decide whether this change goes to only this song or maybe only a part of that song, or maybe it goes to 3 songs, or maybe it goes to all songs. That really makes the entire mixing process much faster. Or I can just make some quick new exports for some versions. So I'm just organized, and I think that's it. It also helps on small project. Actually, if I mix jazz, I can mix an entire jazz record meanwhile in one day. And I think 15 years ago, I needed 3 days for it. If you can do the same thing in 1 day, then although you might ask more money than other engineers for your studio, because the studio is large and it's not such a cheap studio, but if I can do the same job in 1 day, then at the end, it's still not that expensive for the client. What else do we have? When recording sounds or compositions that have a wide dynamic range, how do you keep the quiet sounds from getting lost? Yeah, that's actually an important question. In the end, what do we want to hear and what is not so important? Finally, very often I see it in the way that everything is important, and it's my job to make sure that everything can be heard. So maybe quiet sounds can be panned and placed in the room at the given place. Or in other words, one reason why in many mixes you don't hear the quiet sounds so good is that the engineer is not able to create a room behind the speakers. If you are able to create depth behind the speakers, and if you're able to place every little instrument that there might be in this room, you can also hear it. It's like on a stage. If you have a band, a drummer, and then there is maybe a piccolo, but somewhere else, because the piccolo cannot stand in the drum. So it's somewhere else. We always can hear it. And if the mix has really a good dimension, then we can hear the little details. Or then you can bring it up in the mix, or you can compress it. But I think this is a job. Whatever is important, every brush of a snare, if he plays it with brushes, I think you should be able to hear it. And the good test is make your mix really sounding at a low volume. So turn down the volume as soft so that you still hear it. Then press play, and at the same time you talk. And now the question is, can you still hear all the connection between the musical instruments, or is the connection gone? And on a shabby mix, usually if you talk and the mix is played back at a low listening volume, usually the connection of the music falls apart. It's gone. And it should still be there. And if all the little details then are not there anymore because they're so low that you cannot hear them anymore if you're talking, then you need to bring them up. Then, what else? What dictates the hierarchy? That's a difficult word in English. Hierarchy of instruments within an arrangement. When that is determined, how do you keep that focus when arranging or composing or even engineering music? Well, yeah, that is also important. As I said, I think everything is important, and I usually just try out. Maybe there is a guitar part, and there is a vocal part, and there is a snare. What should be louder, the snare or the guitar? I try to make both louder. Whatever you listen to is louder. Actually, I think in a great mix, one of the difficulty is to make everything be the loudest part of it. Everything. And basically, if you're mixing, if you're listening, then you think, oh, the vocal is nice and loud. But if you're really analyzing it, the vocal is not that loud. If you listen to those mixes by this Michael Brauer or also Chris Lord LG, you always think the vocal is in front and it's loud, but it's actually not. If it really would be the loudest part, then actually it would mean that the entire band would sound small. But the band can only be loud if it's only be big sounding if it's also loud, and very often it's louder than the vocal part. So it's just part of the art of a mixer to make the vocal at a not too loud level so that it's integrated well in the mix, but the listener thinks it is actually loud. This can be done with saturation, with drive. It's way more easy to do this in the analog system than in the computer, but it can also be done in the computer. But basically, you bring it up so that it seems to be loud, although it might not even be loud. And then some other parts that you might think are not so important, I usually try it out. What happens if I make it loud? Sometimes I automate it. Maybe if I think it's not so important, I bring it down a little bit. But as soon as this guy is playing a lick and the singer is not singing at the same time, I just make it 10 dB louder and then I go back. So automation is another way to make the arrangement and the mix interesting. Usually I really do heavy automation, even on the board or even in Pro Tools. And I just look, And another thing is pan. If you have 2 electrical guitar and 2 acoustic guitars, well, maybe in the verse, it's enough to just have 1 acoustic guitar, pan it totally to the left, and 1 electric guitar, pan it totally to the right. Maybe that's enough. And then maybe in the chorus, you use all 4 instruments. But if you have an electric guitar at the left and 1 at the right, and they play basically like the same, they just recorded this so that it's possible to make the stereo spread, that's not always the widest sound. It's actually good if it's recorded so, because if you use it like this, or if you need to use it, you have it. But sometimes you can just have 1 electric guitar here, and then you just need something else here. That could be another electric guitar, but it could also be the piano or a Rhodes. Usually the rule is if you pan something hard to the right, something else should be hard to the left, but it must not always be the same instrument. And I experiment with that. And I think this is very important. And yeah, then it's really automation work. And finally, everything that is recorded should be important. Otherwise, I would expect that the producer on the recording already talked about it. If it would not be important, it would not be given me for the mix. That's what I think. And if something is really not working well, or if something is really strange, or if I feel, well, this percussion track really should not be there in the verse, then usually I just take it down completely. I quickly send it to the band. Listen, my input would be, let's not use this in the verse, and then it comes in the chorus. Please give me feedback within the next 10 minutes so I can go on. So I offer something that actually is producer work. And because I'm not the producer, but the mixer, I'm basically offer it up to discussion. And very often this is accepted then, or they even think it's a great idea. But as a mixer, it's not my decision. So I'm not just deleting the percussion and then they don't know about it and they will hear it in the final mix. But I try it out. If I think it's better, I go to ask the producers or the band, do you also think it's better? Can we go on with that? And then all is good. What else do we have? We have, when working, what is the favorite snack among the musicians you worked with? Well, they usually bring their own snack, but just yesterday, it's not here anymore. I asked, do you want to drink some coffee or some tea, or you need some alcohol? And I just said this as a joke, but then the guy wanted some alcohol, but okay, we have it here. And so it was this. So whatever the musician wants, usually they want a lot of coffee. What else do we have? How do you pan? This is asked by Firdaus Fazil. I don't know if I pronounced this right. How do you pan orchestral instruments in a modern song, pop ballad, and during mixing? Well, if I get an orchestra, somebody recorded the orchestra, and then usually the main thing about the orchestra is that you have main mics, and in front of those main mics, the orchestra was sitting, and then it's basically whoever recorded or plays that orchestra, that is then the way we have to have it. So if you have violins at the left and the celli were totally at the right, then you cannot repan the celli in the middle. Then this is just how it was presented. But sometimes it's also violins 1 at the left and violins 2 at the right, and the celli were in the middle. Then this is what we have. But usually on an orchestra, we open up the stereo mics or the Decca3 or whatever main mics, and the spot mics in an orchestra are not that important. So actually the pan is determined by the recording engineer, or hopefully by the composer or producer who already discussed this with the recording engineer. There's not so much that you can change, because if you open the Decca3, the celli are right, but then the close mics of the celli, you pan them to the left. That would sound totally strange. So this is really, if I record film music, or if I'm the mixer, then usually before the recording session, I will discuss this with the composer, and then the composer goes to the recording studio, sometimes with me, but sometimes if it's recorded in Abbey Road, I'm not always coming with to record it. So we just hire an engineer there, and then we just tell him how to place the orchestra, and then I get what I wanted. And I don't know, or maybe you were referring to orchestral instruments in a sampled way, so that we just get orchestra samples. Then this is the point where I I'm not going to accept the job. I said no to a lot of mixing jobs recently because this was like a pop ballad with orchestra, but the orchestra was done with samples, and that's not the right way to do. Because electronic instruments are great, samples are great, yes, but only if it's used as a new instrument, if it's used as something special. If a sample is used to recreate an orchestra just because the producer doesn't want or is not able to spend the money for a real orchestra, I think the song should be without an orchestra then. I think about Yesterday from the Beatles. If this was not with real orchestra, with real strings, but with sample strings. Of course, back then they didn't have samples, but no, it would not work. And to me, music, either use a synthesizer, use a sampler, but do something with those instruments that those instruments are great with or great for, but the sampler is never great to replace an instrument. I even was given tracks for a jazz mix, and it was a female singer. It was a great singer, actually, but the grand piano was sampled. And I just said, I think that's a waste of money to then mix it with me. And it's also stupid for that singer, because maybe the singer doesn't understand it. But if you're a nice jazz singer, you want to come out, you want to show the world what you are able to do. And the comping is done with a sampling piano. Everything is for nothing. Because, I'm sorry, but just nobody is going to listen to this, because a sampled grand piano is not delivering any emotions. It's just not happening. That's just a nothing. And I'm not going to mix nothing. I'm not interested then. And I also think it would not be fair if I take money for something that I know that even if I mix it as good as I can, it won't be a success just because, the production, the recording is not right. If a real grand piano is needed, then a real grand piano needs to be recorded. If a real electrical guitar is needed, a real electrical guitar needs to be recorded with a real amp, not an amp simulator. And that's the point. And that's just my opinion. But I try to be as honest as I can, and I have no problem to say no to a mixing job if I feel it's not done right. If we could, and this will be my final word for this answering part, if we could replace instruments with digital technology, why then haven't we classical concerts with orchestra and piano, and the piano would be a sampling piano and a master keyboard would be there? Why? If this was so good as many think, this would happen. Because if you have the real orchestra and the real grand piano on stage, most stages are too small and then the conductor has no place. So if the technology was good enough for this, we would see at least some concerts where the classical piano player would have a master keyboard and they would just use the best sample. The reason that we never ever have seen this in classical music is that we are far, 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 far away to really be able to recreate a grand piano. And probably we never will be able, because real instruments have a living quality, and that's what the musician needs. He needs an instrument with a real living quality. And for the same reason, I mix analog, because I think that this is a real quality that we can get then. So that's for the question. And thanks.